we're back for a follow-up episode with Pete Susca, and mentioned before the principle of OpEx safety. And so last time you took a minute to introduce yourself and the topic. So I'm going to suggest anybody tuning into this episode maybe hit pause and go back and listen to the first one if you haven't already, because we're going to jump right into things today. But if you did listen to the first episode, then welcome to the follow-up episode, where today's Pete's going to lead us through the second article that we'll share with you guys about 7 strategies for OHS professionals to elevate their influence within an organization. And we were just chatting ahead of hitting record, and this is a really juicy topic, and there's a lot to get into. So I'll turn it over to Pete to kind of introduce the topic in a little more detail, and then we'll get into the questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me back. This article, like I said, I think you've already mentioned, I had a series of 15 articles in a column called Business Class in the ASSP Professional Safety Journal. And I had drawn out the cycle of articles and how I wanted them to flow. And then as I was going through this, I said to myself, oh boy, I said, I'm going to dress people up and they're going to have no place to go with this if they don't have the authority, respect, all of those things to be able to even do any of these things. So I said, oh, let's stop. Once I introduced the first article, then I went into, okay, how do you position yourself to be respected for more than just safety, right? Because that's what we're talking about here. Safety is just kind of the door into helping the organization as a whole. So what I've found over the past, I've been doing this 45 years, I probably talk to 30, 40 in the process of doing work, safety professionals a year. Okay. And, you and I go to these conferences and we see the creme of the creme, right? We see the top of the pile. In a lot of organizations, safety professionals are challenged. They're challenged with getting respected, time, money, all kinds of things, even office space, right? And so I said, let's put some effort into this. 'Cause I've learned a lot in my career of being that person who's wasn't quite respected and trying to figure out how to get out of it, right? So what I found is that most safety professionals, the challenge with safety professionals is really more organizational than it is technical. We can find plenty of resources for, how do I guard a machine or whatever it is, that we're technically
Right.
trying to do. But the organizational piece is what keeps us from being able to fulfill that value, to engage, to sustain, to do all the things that we need to do. So a lot of safety professionals out there are challenged in their organization. So this is to help them. And I think what you're going to see as we go through this is the question you have to ask yourself as a professional. Is it the organization, or is it you, or is it both?
Right.
Right? Is the organization in the way of you? Are you in the way of the organization, or are you both challenged?
Yeah.
Right? And you need to know that, because you need to know what you need to work on, right?
Right.
So if you don't know that, go out and figure that out. Go and figure that out. And again, here are the things that I see all the time. Safety professionals not respected in an equal fashion to their peers. And what does that mean? Well, if you're the safety manager and there's a quality manager and there's an engineering manager and there's an HR manager, are you respected in a common way? And that might mean, are you called to the same meetings? Are you invited to do the same things? Is your office space the same as theirs?
Right.
All of those things. You're not included in business decisions. Now, that depends on the level, right? So if you're an executive, then you should be part of executive business decisions, all of them, right? And if you're a plant person, then you should be in charge of, you should be sitting at the table where the plant leadership team sits and makes decisions. And I don't care if you think they have nothing to do with safety, they all have to do with safety. They all do. Okay. And if you're not there seeing that, then it's getting out into the plant and you've got to figure out how to undo it. And that's not where you want to be. You don't report at the right level. Maybe
Right.
you've got somebody between you and that person making decisions. And sometimes that's good because maybe you don't have the comportment or wherewithal to speak at that level and somebody can do it for you. But also there's an opportunity for them to filter the information the decisions or rounding the edges on things that are really critical. They don't speak the same language as you do. That's the case in a lot of organizations, right? We speak a different language. We're islanders. We speak safety language. They speak business language. And I'll tell you, I've been in jobs where they looked at me as some kind of black magic person. Like, we don't know what the hell you're talking about. Just go and do it. Um, safety is measured differently. And look, we measure safety differently than a lot of other functions measure their function. Even quality doesn't measure risk like we measure risk. Okay.
Right.
So that whole perspective of leading indicators and all that stuff, that's where that gets challenged with regard to what people are used to hearing and measuring, right?
Yeah.
So the goal of all of this is to get you equally respected to the other business leaders that are our peer leaders,
Yeah.
and and realize that you're not the ultimate OHS or safety decision maker. The senior management, operations management is. You're there to devise, support, and provide oversight. You are not the end decision maker of safety because the people who have to balance productivity and quality and cost and all that have to balance safety. And
Right.
your job is to help them do that well.
Yeah.
So
I,
that's
and I
what
like,
this whole thing is set up for.
yeah, and I liked what you said about you, the company, and other factors, because I've primarily been in within the construction industry when I was in industry, moved around a fair bit, I think, as people do in construction, and there were definitely times where it was me, and there were definitely times when it was the organization,
Yeah.
and sometimes it takes a few iterations and a little bit of experience to recognize, you know,
Where it's coming from.
yeah, where it's coming
Yeah.
from. So you're emphasized calibrating to the organization. So how do you go about doing that, or
Yeah.
processing processing that?
Well, there's a lot to that. I'll talk at 10,000 feet here, I guess. Um, you need to first understand how your organization creates and loses value. Okay. What do we do that creates value for our product, our service, or whatever it is we do? Okay. What has to be in play for that to create value to us and to the customer, right? And then what detracts from that value? Okay. Is it inefficiency? Is it poor quality? What is it, right? And what are the symptoms of that in your organization, right? You need to know that because you're going to work off of that. Everything you're gonna do is going to be to push value and chase losses with safety integrated into that decision making. So again, what are the benefit drivers? What are the key success factors? You need to know that and what's in the way of those things, right? And you need to be able to see that in operations. And that's where I spend a lot of time teaching people how to see that in a
Right.
dynamic organization. You need to know the basics of the other functions. What do the finance people do, right? What is their role? How do they measure? How do they make decisions? If you're going to link yourself up, and I do recommend that you link yourself up with a mentor or someone that you can use to bounce things off of, or they can give you a fresh perspective or a outside perspective of your perception or people's perception of you. Uh, I, every single organization where I was an executive, I got friendly with the finance people. Okay.
Yeah.
Because where the money goes, the values are. Money
Right.
and values are like this. Now, I don't care what's written on the wall when you walk in the door of your company or what's on the website. That is reality. Okay. So watch where the money goes. Watch where the money goes. And if you can be with a person who's telling you how they're spending the money and how they're making financial decisions, then you will have a real understanding of how decisions get made around not just your um, interest, but the interest of the company as a whole.
Yeah.
So financial folks, continuous improvement folks, if you got OpEx folks or those folks in your organization, they should be, I get close to those folks because I speak that language. Like I said, back when I was in the early days, learned CI, just like I learned safety. So I see the world through process. Supply chain, right? Those are some of the first decisions that get made before things hit the plant. And if those are unbalanced, the operation of the plant's unbalanced, how are they making their decisions? HR, all those, you need to learn what they do, what they value, how they're measured, okay? Because what we're going to do is we're going to help them. Okay,
Right.
we're going to help them. Um, you need to bring something to the party, their party, right? Like I say to my son, he'll go to somebody's house. What are you bringing? What are you bringing? He's like, what do you mean? I said, you got to bring something, right? And so if you're going to somebody else's party, you're going to somebody else's house, you're going to HR's house, you're going to quality's house, you need to bring some value with you. Okay. Hey, and value is something that makes them look better. Okay.
Right.
Something that makes them look better, something they want, not something you think is a value, something they think is a value. Okay. So you need to learn that, right? Um, what are the organization's expectations and challenges? You need to understand that. And where you get that is you sit in these meetings and you listen. You listen to what challenges these folks have. They're all trying to juggle all of these balls. And there are challenges every single day getting that done. And you need to listen carefully to that because in those challenges is one, risk implications, and two, implications or opportunities for improvement, which you can facilitate. Okay. Um, and then I talked in the relationship diagram in on the left of organizational operational factors. You need to understand some of that stuff as you go along. Um, who is this company that you're working for? Who do they want to be, and where do they come from? Right? A
Right.
lot of times the history of the company influences the way the company makes decisions, the market the company's in, the leadership history, the union history, all of these things, they influence the dynamic of that plant or that company. You need to study your company. Like I said, we're not in this because we're making safety. We're in this because
Right.
we're in construction and we're providing a service or we're making something in a factory. Okay. That is the core,
Right.
not us. Okay. We are
Right.
not the core. So our job is to support the core, right? So you need to understand the attributes of your organization. And the best way to see that is through the way people make decisions.
Right.
So that's how you think,
Yeah.
right? That's how you see value, right? That's what I watch. And again, decisions at the top beget decisions at the bottom. Okay.
Right.
Every single tough situation that a worker has, whether on a construction site, whether in a manufacturing facility or out there in the service, servicing something, started with the executives. Started with the executives, and then it worked its way down through, you know, regional managers and all the way down in translation, right? And
Right.
if you're a service guy and you're chasing broken machines, it's because somebody decided that PM needed to be cut to save money or something, right? Some bigger decision got made. Or we don't want to spend money on new machines. So we're going to keep these limping along. That just puts you at risk, right? So
Right.
all of those decisions were made way above you. You need to understand that. Um, and most importantly, every single thing that the company wants, values, whatever the right word is revealed at the coalface, right? So if the
Right.
construction site, the service area, the manufacturing floor, that's where you see the real company. Okay.
Right.
All of these folks think they know the company, but the reality of how it gets done, and I tell people all the time in leadership, when I do a lot of leadership work, I say, you folks may make the first decision, but your workers make the last, and that's the one that gets counted. All
Right.
of your metrics are from them, right? Quality, delivery, schedule, safety is the folks at the coalface. Okay, so don't forget that in your decision making. You're making decisions for them to facilitate what you want, right? And
Yeah.
then people don't see that a lot of times.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
very simple principle, but you got to set them up to succeed at all of these things. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on how sometimes we don't. So you need to understand the operational reality. And, I think a lot of the hop stuff and all that's gotten people into talking to people on the shop floor. I've been doing that for my whole life because if you've been in the continuous improvement world, you value workers, right?
Right.
And so I go out to the shop floor and find out what's in their way. What's in the way of you being successful at safety, at quality? What's in the way? What's getting in
Right.
your way? Okay. Um, and then go back and find out why that seems to be okay. So in your role, what you need to consider is the history of your job before you. Okay, you're coming
Right.
in before, maybe you're the first person in there, so they don't know what you're supposed to be doing. Okay, so you may have to establish some clarity around roles and responsibilities, how you get
Right.
measured, all those things. Now, you also may have a little flavor from the first person that came before you or the people that came before you, and that may be good flavor, it may be bad flavor, right? So you need to find out some of that. You need to find out the maturity of the initiatives that you have. If you got a corporate entity, what their initiatives have, how you fit into all this stuff. Do you
Right.
align? Do your values align with the values of where safety's going, right? And then what are the perceptions of the leadership team around safety? Uh, Construction is a great one. I mean, been in the construction world. You walked out to the job site in early days of construction, you were not somebody that people wanted to see.
Yeah.
Shit, here comes the safety guy, right? He's going to
Right.
slow us down. He's going to take us, he's going to do something bad, right?
Right.
So, if that's the flavor that people get, you got work to do. You got work to do. What authority do you really have? What authority do you really have? What can you say needs to change that people stand up and listen? Okay. Now, look, a lot of times we'll go out to the shop floor and we'll say, people, you have the authority to stop a process if it's unsafe and all that. So, well, what does a safety person have authority to do that can be done like that without asking for permission? Okay. Not
Right.
saying that you're going to pull that pistol every day, but
Right.
you don't want to be Barney Fife either, right?
Yeah.
So you need to know if that gun's loaded. Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? You ask them some questions. Hey, if I have this situation, if I have that situation, do I have the authority to do this? Do I have the authority to do that? Okay. Your boss, are they the ultimate decision maker, or does your boss report to the ultimate decision maker? Or are they a couple steps down? Because believe me, you want to be real close to the ultimate decision maker. Okay. Because what you're doing is giving them a flavor of a good decision. And this is the safety flavor, or the occupational health and safety flavor, right? So decisions have lots of flavors in them, right? They have to balance all of these imperatives. You're giving them how good this tastes in their decision.
Right.
Okay. So they better be listening to it if they really value safety. And then what are the needs and expectations of your boss? What do they really want? What do they really want from you? And sometimes what your boss wants confounds what you think what you really need to be doing.
Right.
Um, are they okay with the facts or do they just want to hear good news? I've
Right.
had bosses that just wanted to hear good. I remember sitting
Yeah.
down with my boss one day, and I was a safety practitioner, right? And so I went out and saw a bunch of stuff and came back to a meeting. I was all revved up. I said, I'm going to tell her how the reality is, and she's going to go and fix this, right? So I roll off all of this stuff that's not being done well. She looks at me and she says, "Well, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?" Which is, yeah, uh, don't you have any good news for me? Right?
Right.
Don't you have any good news for me? She didn't want to hear
Yeah.
bad news. She didn't want to hear
Yeah.
bad news. Okay. And there are people above you that do not want to hear bad news. You need to sort that out.
Right.
Okay. All right. So does that make sense?
Yeah. It's conjuring up all these memories that I have, because there was a district manager who was, they called him Mr. Sunshine because all he wanted was sunshine and rainbows and
Lollipops. Right.
remember sitting down with him to have a difficult conversation, and he picked up a pad of paper to start with, and then he put it down and decided that he wasn't gonna, take any notes during our conversation. So you learn pretty quickly that,
That's right.
there's certain things that he doesn't want to hear. And to your earlier point as well, I was relatively new at that stage, and other people had given me the heads up and said, hey, like this is how it's gonna go, and this is what you
That's
should
right.
do, and so definitely, whether they're in your department or outside your department, they can others can help you get the bearing for the feel and the type of people within the organization, right?
Yeah, and look, you brought up a great point. You need to make you the safety pro, the safety practitioner. You need to make a decision. Is this organization a good fit for you? Because let me
Right.
tell you, you're not going to change the organization.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, see where all this gray hair came from?
Yeah.
Me
Well,
thinking I could,
yeah,
right?
and
And I think sometimes I think I can work around. I mean, look, I can change a lot of things. I can make a lot of things happen. But if you've got an ethic in your organization that doesn't match with your ethic, you are not going to change that. So
yeah,
you got to make a decision. Are you going to round your edges? Because they're not going to round theirs.
yeah, and it's not to reminisce too much, but I had gone from a small organization to a much larger, like $2 billion construction company. And my first experience, I'm working with the superintendents every day. I'm interacting with the engineering manager regularly. And then the second job was, they're so huge. I'm just in the corner processing paper. That's what it felt
Right.
like. And to your point, it's like they've been here for 100 years. They don't care what great new ideas I have or thoughts. They're going to be here for another 100 years, and so I need to find that smaller, more agile organization where they welcome ideas and
Right.
innovation, and it wasn't
Yeah. And
it
and
wasn't going to be a success, right?
you're too valuable to spend your life being frustrated.
Yeah,
I'll just say that to every single
yeah.
safety professional. You are
It
too valuable.
it does, and we hear it all the time from people, and it does. Death by a thousand cuts. It sort of
Yeah.
steals your soul little by little until you don't recognize yourself anymore, and that's
I've
definitely
been
what
there.
what happened.
I've
Yeah,
been there.
yeah,
I've
me
been
too.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't want to go there because that's going to affect your family life. It's not just doesn't stop at the door of work.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, good
yeah,
point.
absolutely. So you kind of mentioned as well, like asking people, what's in your way, what's preventing you from moving forward. If you do identify a challenge, right? How can you tactfully challenge a low standard of care within the organization without risking that alienation? Because we talked about, being perceived as the safety cop or as
Yeah.
a negative contribution. So how do you do it without that alienation?
Well, it goes back to, I guess, you use the word standard of care. I use that term all the time. Um, what is the standard of care? I know what's in the policy and what's on the board and what's on the little tent cards and all that stuff, right? What is the standard of care really, right? You need to identify what the real standard of care is. What is an acceptable level of risk? Now, that goes back to the question I always ask when I go as a consultant, when I always go into a new company, because I always start with a clean piece of paper. And I'll say to the highest level person that I am able to speak with, how safe do you want to be here? And what does that look like? What does that look like? Right? Now, a lot of people will say, well, we don't want to get people injured. Okay. Injured how? How much injury? Right? You got to dig in, right?
Right.
Because if you don't understand where that line is drawn, then you're not going to be able to define that line for them out in the shop. Okay. What is the line? Because that line carries cost, time, your reputation, all of those things. If you're drawing your line and they're drawing their line differently, you're going to have a problem. So, right from the beginning, you need to understand where their line gets drawn and how they're drawing that line. Now, in a lot of companies, I mean, look, most companies are still measuring results for safety. Okay. And look, the reason why organizations are comfortable with results metrics is because everything in the business is a result metric. Everything. Okay. They're not measuring risk in the other elements of the business, right? Risk of not getting, a stock price right or whatever it is. They're not measuring that. They're measuring the ability to achieve it, right? And whether or not they've achieved it, right? So results. And that's why, I say to people who are, talking a lot about predictive indicators and upstream indicators and all that stuff, you got to walk your way. You got to walk them to those metrics. And what I mean is walk them from a value perspective. Do they value people participating in meetings like they value incidents? Okay. Do they see the corollary there, if there even is one? Okay. So you've got to establish that. So how safe do you want to be usually comes out of their mouth as we don't want to hurt people. Okay.
Right.
Then I'll say, all right, let's take a walk out into the shop. Let's take a walk out to the construction site. What does this operation look like when it doesn't hurt people? They don't know. They don't know. And that's what you're doing for a living. You're changing that. And they don't know what you're doing.
Right.
Right? You're changing risk. They're measuring outcomes or events or whatever you want to call them. Okay. Results. Okay. You're changing risk. The money that you're going to try to get is to change risk, ultimately to change results, but it's not going to happen like that. Okay. So they've got to be able to see the dynamic of today versus the dynamic tomorrow of their work sites and their operations as the metric.
Right.
Not as the result, not the results. The results will come out of that change, be a result of that change, right? But they need to see the results real time. What does that look like? And it's a change of risk or change of approach and process and all those things, right? And they've got to be able to see that. They got to be able to understand that. So how are they measuring safe? How are they measuring safe? And I think what I find is even in companies that have been at, even management systems, have management systems, I'll call them well-evolved safety management approaches in companies. I've been doing this for a long time. I'll go out to the shop floor. I'll take 4 or 5 people. I'll take them out and look at something and tell me if this looks safe to you. Okay. And what you'll get out of their mouths is opinion, perception, perspective, not some calculated common way of measuring risk or safe enough, whatever the right word is, right? That's a problem. That's a problem. Okay. I'll tell supervisors all the time. You ever ask your folks at the beginning of the day, got any safety issues? And nobody raises their hand? It doesn't mean you don't have any safety issues. It means they don't see it as a safety issue because everybody sees those things differently. If I've
Right.
gotten bitten by that thing, I have this little slide that has two people in it and two little, what do you call them? Bubbles above their heads. One's a kitty and one's a lion. They're both looking at the same thing. One person sees it as a kitty. They're both looking at a cat, right? One person sees it as a lion. The other person sees it as a kitty. That person that sees it as a kitty, when you ask him, is there a harmful lion out there? They said, no, I'm good. Right? It's a
Mhm.
kitty. Right? So that's got to be fixed. I mean, look, it wouldn't work in finance. Imagine five financial people measuring profit differently. Imagine five quality people measuring quality differently. It wouldn't work there. Why do we think it works in safety? It doesn't. It doesn't. That is the failure mode right down the shop floor. So
Right.
we've got to create a way to get everybody looking at the same thing, generally saying the same thing about it. Okay. So once we can do that and then get them to start thinking about risk, okay, then I can approach a conversation without alienation because now they and I are looking at things the same way. Okay. The way that you're going to alienate people, I think sometimes is people aren't looking at it the same way, or they're looking at it from their lens. And they see something, they want to see something differently than you do, whatever it is. You're going to need to align their lenses to your lens, right? And that's a big piece of this, is everybody seeing safe enough and unsafe and imminent danger the same way. And it's the principle I use is when I teach these things is archery. Like if you're going to teach somebody to shoot a bow and arrow, right? You get them all lined up and they know how to hold the bow and knock the arrow and place the arrow on their face and all that. And I say to them, okay, I want you to fire 3 arrows downrange at the target. And I'll say to the group, where do you think these arrows should go? And everybody will say, the bullseye. And I'll say, no, I don't want them in the bullseye. I want them in a group. I want them in a group. And frankly, I don't even care what the group is. I want all 3 arrows together because now that takes an infinite amount of variables and narrows them down to 2, right? Elevation and windage. I fix that. I've got all the arrows in the bullseye. So you have to get consistency before accuracy if you want consistent accuracy.
Right.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do with everybody is get consistency, generally looking at the same thing, generally saying the same thing about it, right? Um, so that's kind of where we need to be to get this conversation going along the lines of, hey, I think this might be good for us. And can you see what I see, right? That type of
Right.
thing. Um, so a common way of looking at risk, a common risk language, and then clearly defining everybody's roles and responsibilities in managing risk. And I'm not just talking vertically, I'm talking horizontally in the organization. What's
Yeah.
HR's role? What's supply chain's role? What's finance's role? What's engineering's role? And do they have the skills and capacity to make decisions with that information, right? Balancing benefit and risk in every single function. Okay. So that's hopefully that kind of answered your question. You've got to get
Yeah.
everybody talking the same language first so that, when you're looking at something, they're in agreement. You can establish some agreement, right? Once you
Right.
establish agreement, then we can move together.
Yeah. And just thinking about tactical strategies or tactics that
Mhm.
people could use. Like I remember um, working with, again, the senior safety professional electrical contractor, and I was asking about the field level risk assessments, and he said we do those more to identify who doesn't see the risks that everybody else sees. It wasn't so much about identifying what risks or hazards are on site because they already know that. It was more a test to see if everybody's looking at them through the same lens.
Exactly.
And if somebody's
Exactly.
missing the overhead,
Exactly.
overhead wires, then you need to
That's
take them
great.
aside.
That's
Yeah,
great because they realize that everybody comes in with a different pair of glasses on, and their glasses are their history, right?
right,
Things they've done, things that hurt them, things they've heard, seen these things seen on YouTube. I don't know, you
right.
know. But everybody's got a different lens. They're coming with different glasses. We all think everybody sees things the same way. They do not.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some practical ways in because you talked about talking to HR and finance and quality. So what are some practical ways safety pros can build cross-functional allies in a siloed organization?
Yeah, when we talk about silos, right? We're talking about separation to a fault. And I see that in most organizations.
Yeah,
It's by design. I hate to
yeah,
say it. It's by design. I was an executive, right? So not only do I get paid a salary, I get paid incentive compensation. And incentive compensation is in addition to my salary based on a set of objectives that are created between myself and my boss. And if I achieve those objectives, I get a multiplier of my salary. Okay. So executives have a lot of money in this. Okay. So now you put people in these separate little boxes and you have one pot of money that they all have to figure out how to share, and one pot of time and one pot of human resources to implement these things. You see this tug of war going on between them. Okay. And it's not overt. It's behind the scenes a lot of times. And you'll see some protectionism, like, don't come into my house telling me what to do kind of stuff, right? All of those things, you'll see that dynamic going on in these organizations. And this is why, because these people are protecting their house and they're protecting their money. Okay, that's what they're doing. Okay, probably more
yeah,
money than the house, because at the third, fourth quarter of the year, everybody's running hard to make their objectives. Get out of my way. Okay, and I've been there.
yeah,
So if you can figure out how to meet your objectives and help somebody else meet their objectives, that's a win-win. And win-win propositions are going to garner you trust. Okay. And that's what you're trying to build with people. You're trying to build some trust. Then trust creates relationship and all of those things kind of move forward where we can actually work together and we can talk together and we can represent something together. That's where we want to be. Right. So what's in the way? These silos, separate metrics, separate objectives, competing for money, competing for resource, competing for favor. I mean, like, there are people at the table competing for favor with the boss. Okay. So you got to sort all this out. Say, all right, what's going on here? Who's the boss
yeah,
listen to? Right? When those side meetings happen, who's in them? Who's in those meetings? Right? I'm sorting out the organization. You need to do that. You safety
yeah,
profession need to sort it. So you need to be there. Okay.
yeah,
I mean, I've had so many safety professionals say, I don't have the time to go to those meetings. You need to find the time.
yeah,
You need to find the time and you need to extract out of those meetings the dynamic of the organization. Not just listen to what everybody's doing. Listen
yeah,
to how they do it. Okay. Um, and remember, um, your growth, your personal success, your kind of knocking down the silos is up to you. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you. You need to figure out your own strategy and your own plan. Um, when I was in the corporate office of a pretty large corporation, I sat three doors down from the senior executive for environment, health, and safety. My boss was a director, and this individual walked by my office every day, never said boo to me. This senior leader, right? I mean, this person knew who I was, but you know,
yeah,
had no interface with me, right? So I went to my boss one day and I said, look, if I'm going to move up in this organization, this person needs to at least know me, and two, needs to respect what I do or what I can do. Okay. So I said, we need to figure out how to facilitate that. He said, here's what I'm going to do. He said, I have a monthly meeting with this person. Um, Next month, I'm not going to be available, and you're going to go in my stead. You're going to go to that meeting for me. You're going to represent what I would say, what I'll prep you up and everything, but you're going to go. I said, fine. Right. So
Yeah,
you got to be
great.
willing to stick your neck out, stretch yourself a little bit. Right.
Yeah,
And get in there. Right. And see what's going on and represent yourself. Right.
yeah.
Because that's your chance. That's the tipping point. That was the tipping point for me right there. That meeting was the tipping point for my career in that company.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, Never step on or over people. Be careful where you step. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go into someone else's house, like I said, bring something with you. Right. I mean, I've been in organizations as a consultant where I've walked in, this is be the senior safety leader of a company, and we've walked into, I'm not going to say what function, but we walked into this function's office and started talking about some cooperative venture. And this person basically said, go back to your hole and do your safety thing.
Right.
Okay. Now, they didn't say it in those exact terms, but I could hear that loud and clear. I said to this person, he just sent us back to our little safety hole.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Right. So, again, figure out how to introduce yourself into into these introduce yourself to these folks, introduce yourself to their realms, find out what they need, try to figure out a way to help them with what they need, establish a relationship, all of those things. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can do that by working through your boss, like I just told you, or working through other contacts or whatever, trying to figure out, navigate a path where you can create a relationship. Like I said, the first person that I used, I always tried to get close to was the finance people.
Right.
Finance people are king. Okay. In most organizations, finance people are right next to the CEO or COO. Okay. Because to whatever they're trying to do,
Right.
finance people have to align and facilitate. Um, Establishing peer relationships. So, if you go to meetings or and the meetings might be a project or an issue or whatever it is, and you're sitting next to an engineer who's your peer, or you're sitting next to somebody, your peer, establish a relationship with these people. Okay. Because now you're establishing a relationship with that function, maybe not at the highest level, but at some functional level where you can add value, you can start to have a relationship with that person. Maybe it's just friendship, maybe you golf together. I don't know. But start to grow your horsepower horizontally in the organization.
Yeah.
Okay, not just in your cell, horizontally grow. Okay, and that's what we're talking about here: horizontal growth. Um, go seek people out, go ask them questions, go to work events where they are. I don't know. Find ways. Okay, find ways to connect. And I always like to help people with something. Geez, I heard that you're having a problem with this. I could offer this up to you, or what about this, or what about that? Or I'm in the shop talking to people all the time, and they say this, whatever, find some way. Like I said, it you should not be just thinking about yourself in the stack. You should be
Right.
thinking about growing your breadth, and that's a cross silo respect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And from a from a sales perspective, you learn in sales training, people love to talk about themselves, and when they're talking, time's standing still, right? So if you're talking, time's moving so slowly, and and people can barely stand it. But so asking questions about work, about personal life, about side
Yeah.
projects,
Right. I
um,
mean,
like
this
you
is my
said,
wall back here. You can see I got a fish there, right?
yeah,
So are you a fisherman? Yeah. Oh, well, I'm a fisherman, and start a conversation, right?
yeah, yeah. Questions are the key.
Yep.
Yeah. So what can you share, or sorry, can you share an example where a safety professional successfully changed senior leadership's perception by sharing those operational insights? And that kind of goes back, I think, to our first episode of looking at things through that operational lens.
Yeah. I think this starts with perception, and building perception, right? Perception of many things, right? Um, Leaders, and the higher up you go, they know more about what than they do how. And safety is all about how. And what I mean by that is, how did you do the job versus the fact that you didn't get hurt? Well, you did the job with X amount of risk. Nobody's measuring that. Nobody's talking about that up. Okay. They're talking about whether somebody got hurt or not. Okay. So their perception of safe is a little different, is results. It's not how the results were achieved. There are a lot of people in the organization that don't know how these results were gotten. They do not know. Okay. Now, the nice thing about being a safety professional is you should be living on the floor. You should be living in the field. You should be living in reality. Okay. And you should be absorbing the dynamic of that reality. How do people do what they do? How do they make decisions? What's going on out here? All of that is what you should be an expert in, because they're not, and they need to hear that. They need to hear that. Would you like to know how the results were achieved? Okay. And so that is, I think, a value that we can bring to the table that not a lot of other functions can bring as well as we do. I mean, how many times I walked the floor with a safety professional from a plant, and people say, hey, hey, hi, hi, hi. They're all talking to them, right? They know all these people. They know all these people. You walk through the plant with a finance person, nobody's going to say hi to them. They don't know anybody, right? You walk through an
Yeah,
HR person, they don't know anybody, right? And they're supposed to be people, okay?
right.
We are the most knowledgeable and most trusted people on the floor of most organizations. We should be, because we're not working for the company, we're working for you. And not a lot of people can say that.
Right.
Be proud of that. Be proud of that. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, a lot of companies, I worked in the steel industry, for quite a while. And, when I first got in there, we were doing fatality prevention work and kinds of stuff. And the union guys were looking at me like, oh, consultant, and so they didn't trust me. And so I said, okay, my goal is I'm going to have them not just trust me, I'm going to have them see me as buddy. Okay. And I worked to the point where maybe, it took me a few years. They were like, we got to have Susca here. We got to, I mean, they were, that when you get a senior union leadership to love you, that's better than the CEO loving you. To me, that's
Yeah,
like, I'm there. I'm there. Um, so again, realize that most leaders don't see operational reality. They don't see the how. That's where you have an opportunity to change their perception of their reality. You're their eyes and ears. You're their eyes and ears. They don't have that sense of what's going on. They just get data, right?
right.
But they're looking at the speedometer in the car, not looking at who's driving, how they're driving, and they just look at the speedometer. Okay. Um, what workers really think and what they do and why. Why, right? That's what you need to know. I know what you do. Why do you do it that way? Why? What's behind it, right? Ooh, that's stuff that is going to roll up. That's stuff that's going to roll up. Okay. The health of machines and processes out in the shop floor, you should know that. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about machine and equipment health and process health, right? And I see a lot of unhealthy machines. I see people guarding unhealthy machines. Now here's talk about silo. Here's the safety silo. Okay. We go out, we get money, we say, hey, look, we got all these high risk machines. We go out and get millions of dollars to go guard these machines. We don't bother asking how healthy those machines are. I mean, how good are they really for production, for quality, for scale, all of those things, right? And we guard them. And I'm going to tell you, some of the machines you're guarding, after you guard them, the guard's going to be the most valuable part of the machine. They've got no business being out there.
Yeah.
The reason why they're out there and the management team hasn't changed them many times is they're good enough. They're making enough of the parts. Their uptime is enough, okay? And it's gotten blended in with all the OEE of the rest of the machines, and they don't see this machine that's getting ready to fail and or hurt or kill somebody. They're not seeing it, okay? We need to see that, not just the safety aspect, but the health of the process, right? So some examples. You asked for examples. When I was in the elevator business. I was responsible for European operations, right? So I get to Europe and I said, I'm going to go out in the field. And what I did was I volunteered to help. I was an executive. I said, I want to come to your field job site and I'm going to be a laborer for a week. They're like, they called me Herr Susca, right? I mean, like I was like some, no, I'm going to work with you. No, really? Yeah, I'm going to work with you because I want to know what you do. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to see reality. And they really appreciated that. And so I get to this job site and they pull out these bags of tools that were kind of foreign to me. I looked at them, what are those tools? He said, they're deburring tools. I said, deburring tools? What are you doing with deburring tools? He said, well, we get these elevators in pieces, right? They come in boxes and pieces, and we have to put them together. And all the edges on these door panels are sharp as hell. I mean, they're cutting. Look, everybody's gotten cut. We're wearing gloves. So we decided we're going to take a few hours and deburr all of them in the field. I said, you got to be kidding me. So now, what did I have to do? I had to go back to the plant that made those doors. And that plant was in another country. And said, okay, folks in the plant, how do you define sharp edge? What's a sharp edge? I said, I can tell that you don't understand what a sharp edge is because my folks are getting hurt by the doors you're making in your factory. And we're in the same company. Okay. So you're designing things that hurt people in the field. Do you realize that? And I had to negotiate, between the field people, the field operations and the factory operations were like two separate entities. I had to bring them together and I had to reconcile this problem, one of many, with them to be the arbiter of saying, all right, we all need to agree what a sharp edge is. And you executives, before the thing goes out the door, I want you to rub your hand on it. And if you get cut, it's a sharp edge. You good with that? No, we're not good with that. All right, well then make them dull. Blur the edges, do whatever you got to do. So I had to get them to understand that, right?
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time with management team leaders teaching them how to talk to people about process. So I was in this plant in Quebec that basically took iron ore and made it into pellets, okay, to ship to steel mill. And so there's conveyors all over the place. So it's in northern Quebec. They speak French. So I'm in this program. I'm teaching these executives how to go and talk to people, believe it or not. And I said, okay, we're going to go out into the maintenance area and we're going to talk to people, not about safety, but we're going to see the people we want to talk to from a safety perspective. Here, let me show you, right? So we walk into this area. I look over and there's two guys and they're at this steel table. And one guy's holding a roller, conveyor roller, right? Cylindrical roller. He's holding it on the table, and the other guy's grinding the end of it. I'm like, whoa, this doesn't look right. I mean, it didn't look like from a safety perspective, but to me, it didn't look right, period. Okay. And then there's the separation, right? So I said, I want you to go over there and I want you to talk to them about what they're doing, what's the reason for it, what value comes out of it, all of that stuff. He spends about 10 minutes over there. He comes back shaking his head. He goes, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "What?" He says, "See that stack of rollers?" Yeah. He said, "They're all brand new. We purchased rollers that were about that much too wide, and these guys have taken it on themselves to make them fit." And he said, "I told them, you're taking the temper off these rollers. Stop." He said, "I appreciate you wanting to do something good for this company, but what you're doing isn't that good." Right. So, so I said, "That was brilliant." Bless you. I said, "That was brilliant." He, I said, "Look, let's go at this another way." I said, "If we went over there from a safety lens, right, in a safety silo, we would have looked at that and said, whoa, whoa, we got to stop this process." And then we would have said, "Oh, why are you wearing glasses? And why isn't this, a clamp to the bench? And this could fall on your foot. You should be doing this. And do you have a JHA?" And we would have gone through all that safety shenanigans stuff, and we would have missed the point. And we would have fixed the safety, but not fixed the process. I call that painting on rust, right?
Yeah,
The, the preparation of the job is the process health, right? The
right.
paint, right? If you prepare the surface, the paint, and it could be the best paint in the world, it's going to slide right the hell off in a year. It's going to disappear. And I've watched good safety slide right off of processes every single day. I've watched guards disappear. I've watched processes change that didn't make business sense. Every single time that you go in to change safety, you've got to make the process better. You get better in terms of easier to do, clearer, simpler, more efficient, easier for the people at work. You got to make the process. You should not be going in there just fixing safety ever, ever. Okay. And that's what I taught this guy. He's like, whoa. The other one is what I call calibrating eyes. I walked around a plant, oh, this was a couple of years ago, with a plant manager who really understood process, right? He had good eyes. We walked around and he's finding things that are wrong in his plant. And we're walking around. I said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I said, "Why is it that you see this, but these folks don't seem to see this? Why are your eyes calibrated differently than theirs?" I said, "You need to calibrate their eyes to yours or your eyes to theirs, right? You need to calibrate." And I said, "I would start with your leads or your supervisors, right? Get them walking with you and ask them what they see. What do you see? What do you see? How's it look? What do you see? How's it look? What do you see?" And you drill that. You drill until your eyes and their eyes are calibrated. And then they teach their people, right? Because I see that quite often is that, the plant leader or the safety person's eyes are calibrated differently than the people doing the job. Everybody's eyes should be calibrated pretty much the same way especially when it comes to safety. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah, there's some good examples. I like the roller one because I can just see that happening, on hundreds of plants all over the place where people are just trying to help the company save a few bucks and really missing the point.
I tell people all the time, again, I do a lot of leadership work. I tell leaders all the time, your people get hurt trying to do the right thing. Okay. These people were going to get hurt trying to do the right thing. They weren't trying to, create risk. They weren't trying to, hey, let's see if we can make a safety hazard. They were trying to create value.
Yeah,
They were trying to create value. They thought they were heroes. They thought they
yeah,
were heroes, like those guys in the silo that we talked about, right? They were
right.
trying to be heroes, organizational heroes.
Yeah. So how can OHS professionals balance the need for compliance with becoming more of a business advisor? Because it probably goes without saying, it's easier to walk around with a clipboard and see if things are in compliance versus thinking like that business advisor.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the paradigm shift, right? Is that you've got to be out there being a business advocate, not just a safety advocate or operational advocate. You know, an advocate for better process, better business, not just an advocate for safety.
Yeah,
Like I said before, stop fixing safety. Really.
right,
Safety is the door,
right.
right? If you fix safety, you shut the door. Okay. You need to walk through and learn what's behind that door, because what's behind that door is the business value that you're not going to see if you
Yeah,
just put the good paint
right.
on
Yeah,
there, right? The safety paint on there, right?
yeah,
Um, so always create safety in a way that's good for business. Always.
yeah,
Because I will tell you right now, if safety isn't good for business, it's not even good for safety. It will disappear.
yeah,
It will change. It will morph. It may not be in a year or two or three. Management changes, things change. Boom, it'll disappear. But if it's operationally sound, it'll sustain itself. It will. If it makes money, if it saves money, it will sustain itself.
right.
So you've got to create a process that's good for business and interrelatedly good for safety, to the point at which if you pull the safety out of it, you pull the business value out of it. That's how interrelated it needs to be. And
Right.
we're not good at that in the safety profession. We
Yeah,
think we're justifiably able to spend money. I mean, in the history of the safety profession, right, we went from not having a safety budget to having a safety budget to now having a big safety budget. And you're
yeah,
still a cost center. You're still a cost center. Like, I mean, one of the things that I'll say to people all the time, I'll have these leaders in the room, and I'll say, I got an analogy for you, right? If moving the business forward, or moving parts forward, or getting parts out the door, or spreading service out the door in a car is like the gas pedal, right? So you step on the gas and you're more productive. Is safety the gas or the brake? And everyone says the brake.
right.
Holy crap. Sorry.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
That's everyone's perception of safety is it's the operational brake for value, but
right,
brake. Okay. So you see the conflict that's going on here? All
right.
right. We're saying that it's okay to impede the progress of the business if it's good for safety. I don't think that should be the way we do business. I do not. I mean, the closest thing I think we have right now is probably ergonomics, because ergonomic solutions facilitate many times the ease of getting the job done, whereas a lot of the stuff that we throw on the backs of people does not. Extra
Right.
time, extra money, extra costs, extra steps, extra, extra, extra. Okay. And when we're asking people to go faster, like, for example, you go to a manufacturing facility, no one ever wants me to visit on the last week of the month. Why is that? What do you think?
That's when they're cramming everything out the door.
That's when they're gotta deliver. They gotta deliver, right? So
Yeah.
I'll say to them, yeah, risk assessments, J, say, yeah, 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 I'll get those. Are they designed for the last week of the month or the first 3 weeks? The first three. I said, yeah, problem. Okay. Because what happens on the last week of the month is we put the clutch in and we shift up a couple gears. Okay. And we're moving at a different rate. And that rate is not at the same rate of what safety is able to manage. So we're moving above the level of safety that we had designed for the first 3 weeks of them, right? We shifted gears and
Right.
safety did not come along with it. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's where we've got to eliminate this competing interest of safety. Okay.
Right.
And you do that by not just fixing safety.
Yeah.
You're fixing the reason for the risk, which is the reason for the cost and the reason for the schedule issues and the reason for the organizational impasses. Fix that. Okay. And make safety the gas pedal.
Right.
I need a hat that says that, make safety the gas,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Again, don't change safety, change the process. A lot of times what happens in the decision making of an organization is, I don't know if we talked about balanced decision making, but at the top of the organization, and this goes back to the gatekeeping piece, if people aren't balancing safety risk with benefit, it gets to the plant in an imbalanced fashion. Okay. And those plant leaders don't have the capital to undo a lot of that decision many times because that capital was already, allocated for whatever that initial decision was. So to undo risk is a very difficult thing at a plant level. So a lot of times they'll go into OpEx and they'll spend their OpEx money, their OpEx funds. And when you spend OpEx funds, you're usually buying low-level controls, rules, procedures, PPE, and training. Okay, which are 100% dependent on 100% reliable human beings, which we all know is fallacy. So
Right.
you're putting in place cheap or non-reliable controls. Let's be honest, okay? And so now decision one imbalanced, decision two could not rebalance. Now what did we do? We handed the decision to the worker. Make sure you follow the procedure. Make sure you follow the training. Make sure you put on your PPE. Be perfect. Now we've taken that decision that shouldn't have had to be rebalanced and we put it in the hands of the workers. Shame on us. Okay. So that puts workers at a fork in the road. And I wrote an article called The Fork in the Road, which is the fork between being productive and being safe. And when you get to that last week of the month, or you get to the point where somebody makes a phone call down to the shop floor and says, hey, that stuff that needed to go out on Monday, we need to get it out today. It's Friday. Can you get it done today? Who's going to say no? Right. So now they'll shift a couple of gears. They have to figure out how to make it happen. Did safety come along with it? Not the same safety that there was before we upshifted. Okay. And so now at the fork in the road, what people are going to do is they're going to be productive. When you're not looking, people are going to go down the productive road, not the safe road, because they're two separate roads. Because we
Right.
haven't built them as one and the same. They're a choice at the coalface. And when you
Yeah.
put pressure on people, or people put pressure on themselves, they go down the productive road. Okay. And
Right.
they go down the productive road long enough and they don't get hurt. They actually start to think it's productive and safe. And it's not.
Yeah.
And those are the people that are not going to raise their hand when they say, hey, you got a safety problem? No, I'm good. I'm good. Right. So I teach organizations not to put people in those situations, to balance decision making, and that comes into the gatekeeping and all the other stuff that we're going to talk about in the next session. Again, much of the risk on the shop floor comes from decisions upstream that just did not get reconciled the right way, and now we're asking somebody on the shop floor to reconcile it. Not good. Not good for business. Not good for safety. Not good for anything.
Right. Well, we're getting close to our hour here, and I think in the first episode we talked a little bit too, just I think to try to help set some expectations for somebody who might be in that a position where they don't feel like they have influence with the organization. You've given them lots of great ideas, suggestions, tactics, practical experiences to kind of leverage. But and again, it's going to depend on the person, the organization, the size, the industry. But just from an expectation perspective, what would you say to someone who's listening, feeling optimistic but overwhelmed at the same time, that there's a lot more work to do, to get to that position of influence?
Yeah, that's a great question. Baby steps. Okay. Your situation didn't get to where it is today overnight. It's not going to change completely overnight. So what you're looking for is gathering momentum and not going backwards, right? So now I made a new friend and I made a new relationship. I was invited to a new meeting. Pat yourself on the back for those things because that's moving up the staircase of horsepower. Okay, you're gaining horsepower a little bit at a time. Pat yourself on the back. Don't think you're going to be the golden gal or guy overnight. Okay,
Right.
it's not gonna happen that way. I mean, there are situations where people have, in emergencies or something that people have changed their perspective of people overnight, but that's typically not the way it works. So what you're looking to do is build value and not slide back and build, like I said, build growth horizontally, the breadth of your impact, not just the vertical aspect of it, but the breadth of it.
Right.
Once you build the breadth of it, you know, what's going to happen is they're going to see you as an organizational operative. And, people might even say, hey, would you like to be in operations or would you like to? They'll invite you to other jobs because they see that you're not just a safety box person, that you're able to add value organizationally. And the organization needs people
Yeah.
that can see across. One of the best positions I've stumbled across is process engineers. Process engineers are special people because they're integrators, right? Their job is to take some principle and make it work on the shop floor. Okay. And to do that, they've got to consider all the aspects. Those are great people to work with because if you even have them in your organization, you should go see if you've got any. Okay. Because they're wonderful people in terms of what they're capable of doing and a great person to tactically team with when it comes to setting people up for success on the shop floor.
Yeah. It's great advice. I was going to say to your point about the questions, you're asking enough questions when somebody says, what do you want to be in operations or do you want to be in finance? Like, you're asking enough questions
Yeah,
when you get those
exactly.
questions from other people, right? So
Well, and you may even get a little pushback, like, "Well, why are you asking? You don't need that. You don't need a safety
you're
person."
trying to take my job? Like what?
Yeah, well, whatever. Yeah, again, like don't step on or over anybody. What you're trying to do there is you're just trying to understand. I'm trying to be better at my job, and to do that, I need to understand how I fit, how safety fits, right? In your world, in your world, in your world, right? I don't want to be in competition with you folks. I want to help you. I'm be honest. That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that was a great topic, some great suggestions. I think some real value, real practical examples that people can follow. And so, thanks again, Pete, for joining, and
yeah, you're
definitely
welcome.
encourage everybody to stay tuned for the third episode in the series that we're doing together.
Thanks, Scott. Hope a couple of people said, "Wait, that's me." All right. Well, I wish you all the best. You're in a great safety profession is a wonderful profession to be in. You don't realize the vectors of people's lives that you're changing every single day.
Yeah.
Pat yourself on the back. Thanks,
Well,
Scott.
until the next episode. Thanks so much.